A billionaire, tired of fake smiles, believes there's no kindness left in the world. So he disguises himself as a mortuary worker to test humanity and see who truly has a good heart. Mr. Desmond was still a young man, but already one of the richest men in the country. By the time he turned 32, his name was known across many countries in Africa. His net worth had already crossed $3 billion, and it kept growing every single year. He owned many five-star hotels and a large, famous hospital called Evergreen Hospital. As the CEO and director of all these businesses, Mr. Desmond lived a life that many people could only dream about. Everywhere he went, people tried to get close to him. They laughed at every little joke he made, even when it wasn't funny. They treated him like a king. But deep inside, Desmond was not happy. He had everything: money, cars, mansions, fame, but not a single person he could trust with his heart. He had failed many times when it came to love. Every woman he met only loved his money, his position, and his power. No one ever truly loved him. He dreamed of something pure, a love that was simple and real. A woman who would love him, not because of his money, but because of his heart. One evening, as he sat quietly in his mansion, Desmond began to think deeply. "How can I find such a woman?" he whispered to himself. Then, an idea came to him, something unusual, but powerful. Among his many companies was Evergreen Hospital, one of the biggest hospitals in Nigeria, even recognized around the world. He decided he would go there, not as the owner, not as the CEO, but as an ordinary worker. Not just any worker, but a mortuary worker. He believed that in a place filled with pain, sorrow, and tears, he might meet someone who truly had a good heart, someone who could see beyond money and fame. Luckily, Desmond's face was not well known. Most people only knew his name and power, but very few had seen him in person. This made his plan possible. Without wasting time, he picked up his phone and called the general manager of Evergreen Hospital, Dr. Stanley. When Dr. Stanley answered and heard what Desmond wanted, he almost dropped the phone. You want to work in the mortuary, sir?" Dr. Stanley stammered, not sure he heard correctly. "Yes," Desmond said calmly. "I want a simple job in the mortuary. Nothing more." Dr. Stanley was shocked. This was his boss, the billionaire who owned the hospital, the man who could buy an entire city if he wanted to. Why would such a man want to work where dead bodies were kept? "Sir, may I ask why?" Dr. Stanley asked carefully. Desmond gave a soft chuckle, but there was sadness in his tone. "I'm tired of living like a man everyone pretends to love," he said quietly. "I want to know what it feels like to live like an ordinary person, to meet someone who will love me without knowing who I really am, someone who will see my heart, not my money." For a long moment, Dr. Stanley said nothing. Then, he finally understood. The boss wasn't crazy. He was just a man searching for something money could never buy: true love. "I'll make the arrangements right away, sir," Dr. Stanley said respectfully. "Good," Desmond replied. "And remember, not a word to anyone. If you tell anyone about this, you'll lose your job." "Yes, sir. I understand," Dr. Stanley promised. And that was how it began, a billionaire leaving his palace of luxury and stepping into a world of sorrow and cold halls of death. He wasn't looking for business or fame this time. He was searching for a heart that could love him for who he truly was. The morning was quiet when Mr. Desmond arrived at Evergreen Hospital, not as the mighty CEO, but as a simple mortuary worker. He wore plain dark gray overalls, old sneakers, and carried a small black bag. For the first time in many years, he walked like an ordinary man. No one turned their heads. No one whispered his name. No one cared who he was, and that was exactly what he wanted. A cold wind brushed against his face as he stepped through the mortuary door. Inside, the air smelled of medicine and disinfectant. The walls carried a deep silence, the kind that comes from pain, grief, and memories that never fade. The floors were clean and shiny, yet the atmosphere was heavy. Steel tables lined the room, and body trays slid in and out of tall metal freezers. The smell was sharp and strong, a mix of chemicals and sadness. As Desmond walked in, a few workers turned to look at him. Their eyes trailed over his clean uniform and calm face. Then, one of them chuckled. "Who's this fresh-looking boy?" another whispered, laughing quietly. He looks like he's never worked a day in his life." Their laughter echoed softly through the cold room. Desmond heard every word, but he didn't react. He just kept walking slowly, his face calm, his heart steady. This was now Desmond's new world. A woman soon walked in. She was wearing a lab coat and a name tag that read Jennifer. She looked strict and serious. "You must be the new worker," she said, her voice firm. "Yes, Ma," Desmond replied quietly. "I'm the supervisor here," Jennifer continued. "Your file says you already have 6 years of experience as a mortuary attendant. So, you don't need any training." She handed him a mop and a list of cleaning duties. "Clean the floors, move the bodies, wipe the trays, empty the waste bins, and be fast about it," she said sharply. Desmond nodded without arguing. "Yes, Ma." He had prepared himself for this. He knew where he came from. He was not always rich. In fact, his parents were local school teachers, and life back then was never easy. He knew what it meant to work hard, to sweat, to struggle. So, when he picked up that mop, he wasn't ashamed. He remembered those early days, how his father taught him to stay humble, and how his mother told him that no work was ever too small for a good man. The first few hours were difficult. The mop felt heavy in his hands. The floor seemed endless. His back ached, and his palms, once used to holding fine pens and phones, became sore and blistered. At times, the strong smell of chemicals made his eyes burn. But Desmond kept working. He reminded himself, no pain, no gain. He even helped move bodies. Some were wrapped neatly with names written on tags. Others had no names, just empty bodies, forgotten by the world. Each time he touched one, Desmond whispered a short prayer, for the dead and for himself. The other workers barely noticed him. To them, he was just another man struggling to survive. Nobody offered to help. Nobody offered friendship. When it was lunchtime, he went to the hospital cafeteria. He sat alone at the back with a plastic plate of cold rice and beans. In his old life, chefs would prepare his meals with gold spoons and expensive wines. Now, he ate whatever was served to him. Later that evening, Desmond lay in a small staff room on a thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. The air was hot and heavy. Mosquitoes sang around him, but he didn't complain. He knew the road to finding true love would never be easy. He had left behind gold and diamonds for dust and death. He had traded soft chairs for hard benches, gentle voices for loud orders. But Desmond did it all with purpose. He was looking for something money could not buy, something pure, something real. Before sleeping that night, he whispered softly to himself, "Sometimes, a man must go low so his heart can grow." And with that, Desmond closed his eyes, ready to face another day of sacrifice, hoping that somewhere in this place of pain and sorrow, he would finally find a heart that could love him for who he truly was. The next morning, Desmond woke up before sunrise. The thin mattress beneath him had given him little rest, and his neck still ached from the hard pillow. But his heart was strong. He was determined to face another day. He washed up quickly, buttoned his plain dark gray uniform, and quietly stepped out of the small staff room. The early morning air was cold, and the hospital corridors were already alive with activity. Nurses hurried past with trays, cleaners pushed buckets of water, and the distant sound of rolling trolleys echoed through the hall. The air smelled of bleach, disinfectant, and tiredness. Everyone looked busy. Everyone looked weary. Standing at the mortuary door was Supervisor Jennifer, tall, strict, and serious. Her sharp black shoes clicked loudly on the floor as she walked, her face tight and unwelcoming. She held a clipboard like a weapon, her eyes scanning every worker with suspicion. The moment she spotted Desmond, her lips curved into a frown. "You, the new worker. You're late," she barked. Desmond glanced at his watch. It was still 20 minutes before his shift started. But instead of arguing, he simply lowered his gaze and said calmly, "I'm sorry, Ma." Jennifer's eyes narrowed. "Sorry? Sorry won't clean these floors. Sorry won't wash the bodies." She shoved a mop into his hands, her tone dripping with contempt. The other workers pretended not to see. Some quietly giggled. It was clear they were used to a harshness a woman feared, not respected. From that moment, Jennifer seemed to make Desmond her target. When he mopped the floors, she followed behind him, pointing out tiny spots. "Your file says you've done this job for 6 years, and you still clean like a child," she shouted loudly, making others laugh. Desmond said nothing. He kept his head low and continued working quietly. Later in the day, as he lifted a metal tray from one of the tables, it slipped from his tired hands and fell with a loud clang. The sound echoed through the mortuary. Before he could bend to pick it up, Jennifer stormed toward him, fury flashing in her eyes. "You clumsy fool," she screamed, and before anyone could react, she landed a heavy slap across his face. The sound of it echoed louder than the tray. Desmond froze. The workers stared in silence. Jennifer pointed at him and shouted, "Maybe you belong in the grave with the dead, not here with the living." Her words pierced him deeply. In his real life, people called him sir. They called him boss. Now, a woman who didn't even know his worth had humiliated him like a nobody. But Desmond didn't respond. He swallowed his pride, bent down quietly, and picked up the tray. His face burned, but he said nothing. He reminded himself softly, this is part of the test, a test of patience and humility. By lunchtime, Desmond went to the hospital cafeteria and sat alone at a corner table, eating a few biscuits. He ate slowly, trying to gather strength after the long, tiring morning. A few minutes later, Jennifer walked past and suddenly stopped beside him. "Eat fast," she said coldly. "Break time is almost over. You still have work to do." Her voice was sharp, loud enough for everyone around to hear. People turned and stared. Some whispered. Desmond lowered his head in silence, feeling the sting of humiliation. He swallowed hard and continued eating quietly, pretending not to notice the eyes on him. That evening, after long hours of mopping, lifting, and scrubbing, Jennifer gathered all the mortuary workers. She stood before them like a commander before her soldiers. "This mortuary must be spotless," she shouted. "I don't want lazy people here. If you can't work hard, leave now before I throw you out myself." The workers said nothing. Their faces were tired, their shoulders bent from exhaustion. Desmond looked around and understood what many others couldn't see. These people were not working because they loved their jobs. They were working because they were afraid. Fear, not passion, ruled this place. There was no kindness, no laughter, no compassion, just survival. Desmond sighed deeply. He now saw how dark and cold this world could be, and he knew his journey had truly begun. If he could find a woman with a kind heart in a place like this, he would know that love was still real in the world. That night, as he lay again on his thin mattress, his body weak and his heart heavy, he whispered softly to himself, "True love is not found in comfort. It is found in struggle, patience, and pain." And with that, Desmond closed his eyes, ready to face another long day, still holding on to one quiet hope, that somewhere within those cold walls, a heart that could truly love him was waiting to be found. The morning sun was bright but gentle as Mr. Desmond walked into the mortuary, just like he had done for almost a month now. He had gotten used to the cold air, the strong smell of disinfectant, and the lifeless silence that filled the place. But that morning felt different. As he entered, he saw an old man standing quietly by the door, his eyes red and wet with tears. He was holding a crumpled piece of paper, the tag number of his late wife. He looked lost, broken. Beside him stood a young woman, dressed in the same dark gray uniform as the other workers. Her voice was calm, almost soothing. "Please, sir," she said softly, "take your time. I'll help you find her." She moved gently, with a kind of care that was rare in a place like this. Her black hair was neatly tied back, her steps light and respectful. Though her face looked tired, her eyes carried a quiet light, a light that hadn't been dimmed by the sadness around her. Desmond, who had been cleaning the floor nearby, looked up. For a moment, he forgot the mop in his hand. He watched as the girl guided the old man through the cold room, whispering small words of comfort. When the old man finally saw his wife's body, tears rolled down his cheeks. The young woman, Rose, simply stood beside him, silent but strong, allowing him to grieve. And just when Desmond's heart softened watching her, the sharp, angry sound of heels echoed through the room. Supervisor Jennifer stormed in like a thundercloud. "What is this nonsense?" she barked. "Why are you wasting time talking to people? Your job is not to make friends. Move faster." Rose turned calmly to her and said quietly, "I'm just helping him, Ma. He came to identify his wife." Jennifer scoffed loudly. "Helping? You again? Haven't you learned anything from your suspension? Do you think kindness will save your job? This is a mortuary, not a charity home." The old man lowered his head, embarrassed. His shoulders shook as he walked away. The whole room went silent. Rose stood still, her hands clenched by her sides. She didn't argue, didn't fight back. Her face showed no anger, only quiet sadness. Desmond's chest tightened. He wanted to defend her, to say something. But he stopped himself. He knew he couldn't reveal who he truly was, not yet. Jennifer turned sharply toward the other workers. "All of you, work harder," she shouted. "If I catch anyone wasting time, you'll be the next to get suspended." Her heels struck the floor like thunder as she stormed out. The room grew silent again. No one dared to speak. As Rose bent to pick up her clipboard, a file slipped from her hand. Papers scattered across the floor. Before she could reach for them, Desmond quietly stepped forward and knelt to help. Their hands brushed lightly. Rose looked up, surprised. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice calm and sincere. Desmond smiled faintly, the first real smile he had shown in days. "No problem," he replied gently. For a short moment, they both knelt there, gathering papers together, eyes meeting in quiet understanding. In her eyes, Desmond saw something pure, real kindness. Not for show, not for gain, just genuine goodness. Rose gave a small, tired smile, gathered the papers, and walked away. Desmond stood slowly, watching her go, a strange warmth rising in his chest. As he picked up his mop again, he whispered under his breath, "Maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of something real." That afternoon, the heat pressed through the hospital walls. Sweat rolled down Desmond's neck as he worked, but his thoughts were elsewhere, on Rose. And as the sun slowly sank behind the tall hospital building, one truth became clear to him. This was no longer just about finding love. It was about protecting it once he found it. For the first time since his journey began, Mr. Desmond felt hope. And deep inside, he knew the story of his heart had truly begun. Days passed at Evergreen Hospital, and life in the mortuary continued in its cold, quiet rhythm. Every morning, Mr. Desmond woke up early, worked hard, ate alone, and returned each night to the same thin mattress in the small staff room. Jennifer's sharp voice echoed through the walls like a whip, striking fear into everyone around her. Yet Desmond swallowed his pride and reminded himself why he was there, to find something real, something money could never buy. But lately, something inside him had changed. Now, whenever he walked into the mortuary, his eyes searched for one person, Rose. She was always there, quiet, calm, focused. She didn't gossip, didn't laugh too loud. Yet her presence brought a certain peace to the room, like a candle burning softly in a dark place. One rainy afternoon, as Desmond struggled to lift a heavy body tray, his hand slipped. The tray almost crashed to the floor, and a few workers nearby chuckled quietly. Before he could lift it again, Rose appeared beside him. She reached out and grabbed the other end of the tray, steadying it with her small but strong hands. "You have to lift with your knees, not your back," she said softly, her tone kind and patient. Desmond looked at her, surprised. "Thank you," he said quietly. Rose smiled faintly. "It's hard work. Took me a while to learn too," she said, showing him how to bend properly and move without hurting himself. As they worked side by side, Desmond felt a strange calmness he hadn't felt in years. There was no pride here, no titles, just two people helping each other in a world that had forgotten compassion. That moment touched Desmond deeply. As he watched Rose helping him without pride or complaint, something changed in his heart. For the first time, he understood that real strength doesn't come from power or wealth. It comes from kindness. Later that afternoon, the rain fell harder. During their short lunch break, Rose and Desmond sat under an old tree behind the hospital, trying to stay dry. They shared a small wooden bench, listening to the gentle rhythm of the rain. Rose opened her simple lunchbox, rice and beans wrapped neatly in foil. She noticed Desmond's empty hands and frowned slightly. "You didn't bring lunch?" she asked. Desmond shook his head. "I forgot," he lied. The truth was, he had lost his appetite after long hours of silent humiliation. Without a word, Rose scooped half of her food onto a piece of foil and handed it to him. "Hey," she said. "You can't work all day on an empty stomach." Desmond hesitated. In his real life, people only gave when they wanted something: favors, contracts, attention. But Rose was different. She expected nothing. She just gave. Slowly, he accepted the food. "Thank you," he said softly. Rose smiled, a gentle and genuine smile. "No big deal," she said. "We all need a little help sometimes." They ate quietly as the rain whispered around them. And for the first time in many years, Desmond felt something deep in his heart. Hope. Hope that good people still existed. Hope that true kindness was still alive. Hope that maybe, just maybe, true love wasn't just a dream. After lunch, Rose glanced up at the dark sky and sighed. "I think I should go back inside," she said. "The break will soon be over. I can't risk another suspension from Jennifer." Desmond smiled slightly. "Then I guess we should go," he said. They stood and walked back inside together. Days turned into weeks. Desmond and Rose worked side by side, sometimes sharing quiet smiles, sometimes speaking only through their eyes. Little by little, the invisible wall between them began to fall. Then, one evening after several dry days, the rain returned, this time heavier than before. Thunder rolled gently in the distance as the sky grew darker and the wind howled around the hospital. The workers were allowed to leave early, but many stayed behind. The storm was too strong to face. Desmond and Rose stayed inside, waiting for the storm to calm. When the rain finally began to ease, they quietly stepped out to the back garden. The air was cool and misty, and the old tree stood soaked from the downpour. They sat beneath it again, the ground still damp, the smell of rain lingering in the air. Rose pulled her knees close to her chest, shivering slightly from the cold. Desmond sat beside her, watching the water gather into tiny streams across the muddy ground. The silence between them was peaceful, soft and heavy, yet comforting. After a while, Rose spoke, her voice barely above the sound of the dripping leaves. Rose gave a small, bitter laugh. "I feel that way every day." She paused for a long moment before continuing, her voice trembling slightly. "I work here because the pay helps me pay my school fees. I want to become a nurse one day, not for money or fame, but because when I was little, my mother died of typhoid fever." Desmond's eyes softened as he listened. "We didn't have enough money to take her to a hospital," Rose continued, her voice breaking. "She died right there on the floor of our house. I was only 10. Her eyes glistened with tears, but she kept speaking. "After that, life became very hard. My father did his best, but some days we ate once, or not at all. I promised myself that if God ever gave me a chance, I'd become a nurse. I'd help people like my mother, people who have no one." Desmond's heart ached. He had met many people in his world, people who chased wealth and power. But Rose was different. Her dreams were built on pain and purpose, not greed. Rose looked up at him, her eyes shining with both tears and courage. "I don't belong here forever," she said softly. "This job is hard, but it's only a step. One day, I'll wear that nurse's uniform. One day, I'll save lives." Desmond swallowed hard, fighting the urge to tell her the truth, to tell her who he really was. But he held himself back. Instead, he said the only words his heart could form. "I believe in you," he said quietly. Rose looked at him for a moment, then smiled, a full, bright smile, not tired, not forced. "Thank you," she whispered. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a bond not built by wealth or beauty, but by two honest hearts that had known pain yet still dared to dream. As the rain poured around them and thunder echoed across the sky, two souls sat quietly under an old tree, unaware that love, gentle, patient, and pure, had just begun to bloom. Days after the rainstorm, the sun returned, hot, heavy, and blazing across the city. The hospital came alive again with noise and movement. Nurses hurried through the halls, stretchers rolled past, and voices echoed in every corner. Inside the cold walls of the mortuary, Mr. Desmond continued his quiet routine. Every day felt the same, until one morning. Something was different about Rose. Each time Desmond walked past her, She looked distant. Her eyes were red, and she kept wiping her face as if she had been crying. After watching her quietly for a while, Desmond finally walked up to her. "Rose," he said softly, "are you okay?" She quickly looked away. "I'm fine," she replied, forcing a weak smile. But Desmond didn't believe her. "Please," he said gently, "you've been crying since morning. Tell me what's wrong." Rose hesitated, then sighed deeply. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "My school sent me a message," she said quietly. "My tuition fees are due. They said if I don't pay before the end of this week, I won't be allowed to write my final exams." Desmond felt his heart sink. "Oh no," he said softly. "I'm really sorry, Rose." He paused for a moment. "If I had the money, I'd help you." Rose shook her head quickly. "No, please don't worry," she said, forcing a small smile. "I'll find a way. Maybe I'll save up and write the exam next year." Desmond looked at her quietly, his eyes filled with concern. He nodded slowly and said softly, "You'll be okay, Rose. I know you will." That night, back in his small staff room, Desmond couldn't stop thinking about her words. He lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, his heart heavy. The thought of Rose losing her dream after working so hard broke something inside him. Before dawn, he made a decision. The very next morning, Desmond went quietly to see Dr. Stanley, the general manager, in his office. "Stanley," he said softly, "there's a young worker here named Rose. She's owing her tuition fees, and her final exams are coming up soon. I want to pay everything she owes, but she must never know it came from me." Stanley blinked, surprised, then nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I'll handle it right away." Desmond exhaled with relief. "Thank you, Stanley. And please, this must remain between us." A few days later, while Desmond was cleaning the mortuary floor, he heard quick footsteps. He looked up and saw Rose rushing in with excitement all over her face. She almost slipped as she ran toward him, laughing through tears. "Mr. Desmond," she shouted joyfully. "You won't believe it. I got a call from my school. Someone paid my tuition fees." Her voice trembled with happiness. "I can write my exams. I can graduate." Desmond leaned on his mop, pretending to be surprised. "Really?" he asked with a warm smile. "That's amazing news." Rose nodded quickly, her eyes shining. "I don't even know who did it," she said breathlessly. "But it's a miracle. A real miracle. Good people still exist in this world." Desmond smiled quietly, his heart full. Watching her joy was enough reward. He didn't need thanks. Helping her dream live was thanks enough. But their moment of peace didn't last long. One of the workers, Festus, who was known for gossip, had been watching them. He smirked and rushed straight to Jennifer's office. Moments later, Jennifer stormed into the mortuary, her heels clicking hard against the floor. Her face was tight with anger. "What is going on here?" she barked. "Rose, what is this nonsense?" Dancing and shouting in the mortuary. Rose froze. Before she could speak, Jennifer's hand flew across her face, a heavy slap that echoed through the cold room. "Do you think this is a market square?" Jennifer yelled. "All you do is make noise and distract others. If this happens again, you'll be dismissed immediately." Tears welled up in Rose's eyes as she bowed her head. "I'm sorry, Ma," she said weakly. "It won't happen again." Jennifer turned sharply toward Desmond. "And you," she shouted. "If I catch you standing around when there's work to be done, you'll be sacked too." Desmond's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I'm sorry, Ma," he said quietly. As Jennifer stormed out, Festus and a few other workers began to laugh and mock them from behind. Rose stood still, tears streaming down her face. Desmond felt anger rise in his chest, but he swallowed it. That night, Desmond sat on his bed, his heart heavy with frustration. He stared into the darkness, thinking about everything, the pain, the insults, and the quiet love growing between him and Rose. He had seen enough. He had endured enough. And deep inside, he knew the truth. He had found the one thing he came searching for, true love. Now, it was time to protect it, no matter what it cost him. The next morning, Desmond arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. As he walked toward the back garden, He saw Rose already sitting quietly under the old tree. The morning sun was soft, and a gentle breeze moved through the leaves above them. When Rose saw him coming, she smiled, a small, peaceful smile that warmed his heart. Desmond walked closer and sat beside her. For a moment, he couldn't speak. His hands trembled slightly as he looked at her face. He had carried this secret for too long, and today he knew he had to tell her the truth. Taking a deep breath, he said softly, "Rose, I need to tell you something." She turned to him, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Desmond hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding. He looked into her eyes, searching for the right words to say. The soft morning wind brushed against his clothes as he spoke. "I'm not who you think I am," he began gently. Rose frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Desmond reached into his pocket and slowly brought out something he had kept hidden all this time, his real hospital ID card. He held it out for her to see. On it was written, "Desmond told you, CEO, founder, director, Evergreen Hospital." Rose's eyes widened. Her lips parted in shock as she stared at the card, then at him. You're the owner," she whispered, her voice shaking. Desmond nodded slowly. "Yes," he said softly. "I am." Rose's hands trembled as she held the ID card. "But why? Why would you come here as a mortuary worker?" Desmond took a slow breath, his eyes filled with honesty and warmth. "Because I wanted to find someone who could love me for who I truly am, not for my name, not for my money, not for what I own. I've seen people smile only because of wealth. I've seen hands reach out only for gold. But you," his voice thickened with emotion, "you reached out to a stranger who had nothing to give. You shared your food, your time, your kindness, and you never asked for anything in return." Tears filled Rose's eyes, not from pain but from deep emotion. The truth hit her all at once. The secret payment, the quiet help, the small miracles. It was him. It had always been him. Desmond smiled sadly. "In a world where everyone bows to wealth," he said softly, "I needed someone who would bow only to kindness. And that person is you, Rose." Rose covered her mouth with her hands, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. Desmond reached into his bag and pulled out a single red flower, fresh and beautiful. He handed it to her gently. "I'm asking you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "to love the man who has already fallen in love with you." For a moment, Rose said nothing. Her lips trembled, her tears fell, and then suddenly, she wrapped her arms around him tightly. "I loved you before I even knew your name," she whispered into his shoulder. "I loved the man who mopped floors, carried trays, and shared my rice and beans." The wind blew softly around them, carrying away every fear and doubt. The billionaire who had everything but love had finally found what he had been searching for, a heart that saw beyond gold. But as they stood there in a quiet embrace, Festus, the gossiping worker, was hiding nearby, watching everything. With a wicked grin, he ran straight to Jennifer's office. "Ma," he said breathlessly. "Morning shift has started for over an hour, and Rose and that new worker, Desmond, are outside together. They are not working." Jennifer's face darkened instantly. "What?" she shouted, standing up. "Show me." Festus led her straight to the back garden. When they arrived, Rose and Desmond were still under the tree, holding hands and talking softly. The moment Rose saw Jennifer, she stood up quickly, fear flashing in her eyes. But Desmond remained seated, calm and unshaken. Jennifer's voice thundered through the quiet air. "So this is what you do during work hours? Sitting here like lovers while others work?" Rose stammered, "Ma, we were just..." Silence. Jennifer shouted. She turned to Desmond, furious. "And you think this is a playground? I'm talking and you're still sitting down." She raised a hand to slap him, but before the blow could land, Desmond caught her wrist firmly in midair. "Don't," he said quietly but firmly. "Don't ever try that again." Jennifer froze, her eyes wide with shock. Festus, who had been laughing behind her, suddenly stopped. The few workers nearby gasped, unable to believe what they were seeing. Desmond kept his eyes fixed on Jennifer, his expression calm but firm. Then he turned to Rose and stretched out his hand. She placed her trembling hand in his, and together they began to walk away. Jennifer stood speechless, her pride wounded. Then she shouted after them angrily, "You're both fired. Don't ever come back here again." Desmond turned slightly, a calm smile on his face. "That's fine," he said. "We were just leaving anyway." And with that, he walked away, holding Rose's hand, leaving behind the cold walls that had once hidden his truth. The next morning, the atmosphere at Evergreen Hospital was completely different. A convoy of black luxury cars drove through the hospital gates, their engines humming powerfully. Security guards stepped out first, scanning the area. At the entrance, Dr. Stanley and other senior staff stood in a straight line, waiting respectfully for Desmond's arrival. And then, the man everyone thought was just an ordinary mortuary worker stepped out. Mr. Desmond Toju, now dressed in an elegant brown suit. He looked calm, confident, and regal. Whispers spread through the hospital corridors like wildfire. "Is that him?" one nurse gasped. "The owner," another whispered. "Yes," someone murmured, "that's the man who worked in the mortuary." The same workers who once mocked him now stood frozen. Those who had insulted and ignored him quickly looked away, afraid to meet his eyes. The air was thick with guilt, shock, and fear. Even Festus, the gossiping worker, couldn't believe what he was hearing. He rushed into Jennifer's office, panting. "Ma," he said breathlessly, "they said the real owner of Evergreen is that junior staff, Desmond." Jennifer laughed harshly. "Don't be ridiculous," she said. "That clumsy fool? The one who mops floors and can't even lift a tray properly? Impossible." But Festus shook his head nervously. "Ma, everyone's saying it. They saw him come in with security, and Mr. Stanley is walking behind him." Jennifer frowned, still in disbelief. "You must be out of your mind. There's no way that man could be the owner of this hospital." 2 hours later, her pride came crashing down. She was summoned to an urgent board meeting. When she entered the large conference hall, her steps slowed. At the head of the long table sat Mr. Desmond Toju, calm, composed, and powerful. Her mouth went dry. Her knees trembled. Sweat rolled down her forehead. The memory of every cruel word she had ever said to him came flooding back. "You belong with the dead. You're useless. You're just a fool." Every insult now echoed painfully in her mind. Stanley stood up and began reading from the hospital's code of conduct. He spoke clearly, his voice steady. "This hospital has a zero-tolerance policy for verbal or physical assault. Supervisor Jennifer," he said firmly, "your repeated humiliation and physical abuse of your co-workers, especially Mr. Desmond Toju, who happens to be our CEO, violates every ethical rule of this establishment. Therefore, your employment here is officially terminated." Jennifer gasped. "Sir, please. I'm so sorry," she cried, dropping to her knees. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know who he was. Please forgive me. It will never happen again." Desmond looked at her calmly, his voice quiet but firm. "You're not sorry because you've changed," he said softly. "You're only sorry because you've been caught. You were proud of your actions until this moment. The decision is final." Jennifer began to sob loudly, her body shaking. She rose slowly, her head bowed in shame, and walked out of the boardroom. Outside the boardroom, Festus paced nervously. His palms were sweaty, and his heart raced as he waited for news. When the door finally opened and he saw Jennifer walk out in tears, he froze. She had been fired. Festus's legs almost gave way. He quickly looked down, terrified that he might be the next target. He stood there silently until Dr. Stanley stepped out and told him, "You may go, Festus. You're not being called." Relieved, Festus exhaled deeply. His hands were still shaking as he whispered to himself, "I've learned my lesson. Never look down on anyone again. Always be kind." After that meeting, a quiet change swept through the hospital. The workers were humbled. They had learned a truth they would never forget. Treat every man with kindness, for today's servant might be tomorrow's king. From that day forward, Desmond Toju led Evergreen Hospital openly, yet still humbly, as its CEO. And beside him, always smiling and standing strong, was Rose. After years of struggle, long shifts, and endless nights of studying, Rose finally graduated from medical school. She walked across the stage proudly in her graduation gown, the same dream she once feared would die. Tears filled her eyes as she received her certificate. She had worked for this moment through pain, sweat, and faith. That evening, Desmond hosted a grand celebration in her honor. Friends, doctors, nurses, and top dignitaries filled the hall. Music played softly in the background, and laughter filled the air. Rose stood beside Desmond, her heart full of gratitude. Then, suddenly, as the music slowed, Desmond took a step forward and went down on one knee. The entire room fell silent. Rose gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Desmond, what are you doing?" she whispered, tears already forming. Desmond smiled warmly, holding out a small diamond ring that sparkled under the light. "Rose," he said softly, "you make me a complete man. You gave meaning to my life. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Rose was speechless. Then, with tears streaming down her cheeks, she whispered, "Yes, yes, I will." The crowd erupted in applause and joy. Some of the hospital staff cried as they clapped, remembering the humble mortuary worker who once mopped floors beside them, now proposing to the woman who shared her lunch under a mango tree. It was a moment no one would ever forget. 2 months later, their wedding took place in a beautiful hall decorated with white roses and golden lights. Rose stood glowing in her wedding gown, her father proudly walking her down the aisle. At the altar stood Desmond, smiling as she approached. When they exchanged vows, their voices trembled with emotion. And when he kissed her, the hall erupted in cheers and happiness. A new chapter had begun, built not on wealth, but on truth, kindness, and love. For the man who once searched for a heart that saw beyond gold had finally found it. The end. Moral lessons. True love is never about wealth or power. It lives in kindness, humility, and a sincere heart. It is not found in the size of your house or the amount in your bank account, but in the warmth of your words and the goodness of your actions. So treat everyone with respect, because real riches are not measured by what you own, but by the love, compassion, and light you carry inside. Kindly don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional and inspiring stories.